everyone, and welcome to another rubber dance design team tutorial. This time I'm going a little bit vintage. I'm still using those lovely stamps I got this month called Da Vinci, one of the latest sets of stamps from the Rubber Dance Company. I'm really enjoying playing around with them and seeing the looks that I can create. So this has definitely got a vintage inspired theme, and as I said, I used the Da Vinci set, a sentiment from Think Again, and a little embellishment from the Collage Elements set. So I'm hoping that you're going to see lots of tips on different techniques that you can use in your card making, as well obviously as introducing you to these lovely rubber dance stamps. So just so you can see how many lovely stamps come in the Da Vinci set, there's lots of lovely images, including the Mona Lisa and Da Vinci himself. I'm in love with this daisy, and I used that on my last card, and I'm going to be using one of these ladies. So lots of lovely stamps in that set, but I'm also going to combine that with a sentiment from the Think Again set, and I'm going to use the little butterfly element from the Collage Element stamps, and I'm going to make an embellishment with those. Two pieces of cardstock that measure 5 5/8 of an inch by 7 7/8 of an inch, and in centimetres that's about 19.5 centimetres by 14 centimetres. And you'll find that these pieces of cardstock are just slightly smaller than the card base. And I'm going to be creating the front piece of card first, and I just want to create a lovely daisy print all over this piece of paper. So I'm going to achieve that by using this Cobalt Archival ink, and I'm going to be stamping the daisy randomly all over this piece of cardstock. And I'm just going to work from one corner and work my way out across the card so that I don't leave any gaps by mistake that I can't fit my daisy into. You'll notice I'm not inking the whole of the stalk. That's because it's a little bit long for what I want to do. So I'm trying my best just to ink a fraction of it, sort of probably about 2/3 of the stem, and you'll see that I'm twisting and turning the daisy to fill in all of the little gaps that I create. I really love creating backgrounds to match the stamps or the main image that I'll be using on the card. It's a great way, if you've got a collection of stamps, look for the smaller images and you can just randomly or in a set pattern stamp that image all over a piece of cardstock, perhaps add a little bit of colour, and you've got yourself an instant background to match your project. And I really love this daisy, so it's a perfect excuse to use it over and over again. So now and again I make a mistake and ink up the stalk of the daisy, and I'm using my post-it note just to avoid getting an ink shadow on my background. And now and again I'll use it just to make sure that the stem doesn't impact on the rest of the design. So almost there, just filling in this last little section, and by working your way gradually across your card, it means you don't get left with any little spaces that you can't fill with your daisy stamp. Because I'm going for a vintage look, I'm just scuffing the edges of my cardstock. I'm just using the back edge of my scissors, which are a little bit rough, just to scrape along the very edge of this cardstock. Use your fingers to support the actual cardstock so you don't create creases where you don't want them, and also pay particular attention to holding the actual corners and supporting them as you scuff right the way along the perimeter of your piece of card. So now I'm going to add a little bit of colour to the design, but I'm keeping it quite simple and almost monotone, although I am using a little touch of green. So I'm just using peeled paint. I've squeezed a little bit or swished a little bit onto my craft mat, and I'm using a damp brush to pick up that ink and just colour in the stems, and I'm going to also colour in the centres of the daisies. We'll be speeding up this video when I'm doing these elements where I'm just repeating a process, because you don't really want to sit and watch me colour in all these lovely daisies. But I'm also going to be using some scattered straw. I'll try not to drop the ink pad on my card, and I'm just squishing some of that ink onto my craft mat. You'll see that it's a very similar colour to my base cardstock, and I quite like that. It just keeps things quite subtle, and that helps with this vintage look. And so this is going to take me a little while, and I will fast forward to the next stage. I don't know about you, but I always find this kind of colouring in very relaxing. It's really worthwhile to just spend that bit of time taking a little bit of care, because it does produce a lovely result, and I really am happy with the way this patterned background has turned out. And now I'm going to be using the same scattered straw just to distress the edges of the panel a little bit further, and I'm just using my ink blending tool and swirling that onto the edge of the cardstock. I always think of this technique a little bit like polishing, and I know we don't really tend to do that much these days, but you just swirl that ink pad onto the distress ink to pick up a little bit of the scattered straw, and then remember to place the ink blending tool onto your craft mat and then swirl it onto the edge of your cardstock. And you just need to keep a little bit of pressure to the back edge of the foam pad as you place it down, and that way you'll just be able to glide over the edge of your cardstock just to distress the edges a little bit. Now for a splatting technique that I seem to be using a lot lately. I've got a little puddle of chipped sapphire distress ink on my pad, and I'm very carefully just flicking a scruffy brush that I've loaded up with that ink over my cardstock, just creating a few little dots, and you can just about see those on camera. And then I want to repeat that process with the scattered straw, and it just gives a little bit of an aged look to this print, just sort of stops it being quite so crisp and clean. And so I'm just again adding a little bit of water to my puddle of ink, and then testing that I'm not going to get a huge splat, and then I'm going to get quite small splatters, and then I'm just going to flick this brush entirely over the whole design. And you can't really see the drops that I'm creating, but trust me, they are there. Now you do get your finger a little bit dirty if you don't want to do that, because the ink does tend to go up your nails a little bit, particularly on that dark blue. So you might want to pop on a rubber glove if you need to protect a manicure, or you're going somewhere and you don't want your nail to look like you've been dipping it in a pot of paint. So I'm hoping you can pick that up on camera, just a few little splatters across the card design to add to that vintage look. So now it's on with my second piece of cardstock. This is the piece that's going to be the inner, and I am again treating the edges exactly the same way and just scuffing them a little bit with the back of my scissors. As you'll know from my videos, I do like to make an inner that matches the front of the card in some way, just carrying a little bit of the design onto the inside of the card, and I'm going to be doing that here by just creating a little panel of that daisy print at the top and bottom of the cardstock. So once I've scuffed the edges, I'm using my Tim Holtz ruler just to draw a line at 1.5 inches across the bottom and about 3/4 of an inch across the top. So that's approximately 4 centimetres and 2 centimetres. Remember to keep your pencil mark really light, and then you're going to place a couple of post-its along that line to protect the inside of the card where we're going to put our greeting, and just allow us to stamp that daisy pattern. I'm not quite sure that that line's straight, so just trying again, and again placing the post-it notes in position. And now it's confession time, because you'll see as my video transitions that my post-it notes have now got bits of daisies on, and that's because I dropped the ink pad once again onto my cardstock and had to start again. So here we go with the daisy print. So I'm repeating that same process, starting in one corner and working my way along the thin strip at the top of the card, and then I'm going to repeat that process along the bottom. So exactly the same as you did on the front of the card. So remember just to keep twisting and turning that daisy stamp to create a random daisy pattern. And once you've completed those borders, it's on with exactly the same techniques for the colouring. So using peeled paint for the stems and the flower centres. And then the scattered straw to colour in all those lovely daisy petals. So once you've completed the painting process, make sure that your ink is dry, and then load up your ink blending tool with a little bit of that scattered straw and working from the edge of the post-it note onto the cardstock, just blend a little bit of that yellow ink onto that, I couldn't quite work out which way to do this, onto the actual strip that you've created, and this just creates a little bit of definition once you peel that post-it note away. And then we can go ahead and blend some of that scattered straw around the edge of the cardstock in exactly the same way as you did on the card front. So keep that polishing motion in mind and blend a little bit of the scattered straw around the edge of the card inner to distress it slightly. And then it's back to that little splattering technique. So a little bit of water added to a puddle of chipped sapphire, testing the size of the blobs or the little splatters, and then just randomly adding a few of those onto the card front. And then I'm just being a little bit more heavy-handed here because it's quite plain in the middle. This is quite nice to just add a few more splatters than you did on the front, this time with the scattered straw, obviously a little bit more subtle, but I'm just adding more of them. It just creates a lovely texture on the vintage background. That's the panel almost finished, but I'm just trimming out this little quote that I'm going to use because I've not used this one before. It hasn't been inked up yet. It comes from the Think Again stamp set. It says, "When you follow your heart, the journey becomes the destination." And it really is a nice set of stamps if you like thoughtful quotes, and it's quite a nice one just to have in your arsenal for that occasion when you need some words, perhaps to inspire a friend or to show somebody that you care. So a nice set of thoughtful sentiments, and I'm inking mine up with the Cobalt Archival, and you can see I've used post-it notes to cover up the two little hearts that are positioned on this stamp. I just didn't think that they went with this theme, so it's quite easy just to cover them up while I ink up the stamp, and then I don't get them on my card. Just the quote. I think it's a little bit Tim Holtz, don't you? When you follow your heart, the journey becomes the destination. That's the two panels complete, and you can attach them to your card base. So I'm using a navy blue cardstock. It measures 11.5 inches by 5 3/4 inches, and I've scored it at 5 3/4 inches, so folded it in half. In centimetres, that's about 29 centimetres by 20 centimetres, and then scored at 14.5 centimetres. So you just want a really fine border around the edge of your card, and I'm going to repeat that distressing of the edges of my card base to match. So don't forget, as well as scuffing all around the open edges of the card, you can also scuff gently along that folded edge just to make everything match nicely. And I also decided to open up my cardstock and just repeat that process on the inside, just so that the inner looked like the edges matched as well. So I'm just coming right along the inside as well, so it just adds to that distressed or vintage look that I'm going for. So I've just cut out the piece where I just fanned all that paper dust onto the floor. It's quite a good technique if you're looking for something to get rid of paper dust or glitter. I just wafted the card over my craft mat and hey presto, job done. And now I'm going to attach the topper and the inner to my cardstock. I'm going to be using PVA glue. I think I've explained that to you before. It just gives me a really good bond, and because I keep my cards around for a little while, it just means that I don't get any problems with double-sided tape that sometimes doesn't stay the course. So if you've got a good double-sided tape that you're happy with and you've not had this problem with, then you can easily use double-sided tape for the cards that you're making. But I really have a love of this Cosmic Shimmer glue, and it just dries so quickly. It sticks anything, and well, practically anything, and I just find it much quicker than keep peeling off all those bits of backing tape off of the double-sided tape. So I'm just adding the card in position, you can see what a fine border I've got all the way around from that navy blue card base. So that's it. Now it's time to get on with the card topper. So as the title of the card suggested, I'm going to try and make a cameo, and I'm going to be using two ovals that I've cut out using the Petite Ovals. You can see that messy finger there. The Petite Ovals Spellbinders die, and I've used the second and third one in from the outside edge. That's the best way to show you the ones that I've used. So I've got the largest one in the navy blue cardstock and the smallest one in that cream or buttery yellow, and I'm going to be putting my lady's stamp onto this cream oval, so creating a little bit of a cameo in the process. So I've chosen the lady that's got the little bun on her head because I can add a little bit of colour to her hair and to her dress, and I'm just stamping her at the bottom of, I could have stamped her in the middle, but because it's got the straight edges, I decided I'm going to just stamp her at the bottom. Now if I'd have thought, what I could have done is wipe the ink away from those edges just to curve it off slightly, and then I could have gone with that stamp right in the middle. So if you decide you want to do that, just take a baby wipe or a bit of kitchen roll and just wipe away any ink in just an arc along the bottom of the stamp, and then you can stamp her right in the middle. I quite like how she looks sitting there at the bottom. She's going to be framed by this navy blue oval, and so I'm just going to treat her in the same way as I did the rest of the card and just get her a little bit distressed. So starting with the distressing of the edge with my scissors, then adding the ink around the edges, distressing the blue. You can see that little specks of dust that I was telling you about. Oh, just swish that out of the way, and don't let that get in the way of your creativity. And then I'm just colouring in her hair and her dress with a little bit of that scattered straw distress ink, and then moving the blue oval out of the way just while I add a few little splatters. And I'm trying to be a little bit careful here, don't want it too dark, and I'm leaving out the blue splatters, but just makes her match the rest of the card by adding that little bit of distressing. So otherwise she would look just a little bit too pristine with the rest of the design. Time to colour some ribbon, and I've got a plan to create a lovely ruffle around the blue oval. I've started out by just pressing a big puddle of scattered straw onto my craft mat, and then I've added water. Normally I would add the water with a spray bottle, but I'm using all my spray bottles at the moment, so just using a brush just to add a little bit of water to get that ink moving into my ribbon, and I'm going to repeat that process several times until I get the depth of colour that I want on my ribbon. And it's at this point that I just apply the ink directly to the ribbon just to create some darker patches. So I'm just pressing that pad against the damp ribbon, and that creates a little bit of difference in texture, and then it was just still a little bit clean, so I'm taking that blue ink and lightly adding a few little touches of the blue, and you'll see that it all kind of blends into each other as the ribbon is dried. You can either let your ribbon dry naturally, or, as I did, speed up the process by getting your heat gun on it. Just don't go too close to your ribbon or your fingers when you're drying your ribbon, because you obviously don't want to scorch it and you don't want to catch your fingers. So just be a little bit careful. And you can see that although I've deliberately created the wrinkles in the ribbon by scrunching it as I dried it, I need it to be a little bit flatter for this next technique. So I'm just running my fingers along it and making sure that it's still a bit crinkled, but it's a little bit flatter as well, if that makes sense. So now I'm going to show you how to create a ribbon frill around this navy blue oval. I'm starting with strong double-sided tape. You do need a stronger tape for this. You can achieve it with normal tape, but you're not 100% sure you're going to get a good grip on that ribbon, and you don't want your pleats to unfold. So I like to use a strong double-sided tape. You can see I'm not trying to flatten the double-sided tape. I'm just following that curve, and the reason I'm not that bothered that it's crinkling, which it will do, is because it will flatten once I take that cover or that protective layer across the top of the double-sided tape off. So I'm just concentrating on keeping it nice and close to that edge so that it will catch the ribbon when I start to work with that. So just trim off the excess, and then I'm going to start peeling off that layer, and you can see that once I take that rather substantial piece of backing tape off, I can easily flatten that double-sided tape and those wrinkles are no longer a problem. I keep looking at that blue ink on my finger. I wonder what people think when they see me in the street with my blue finger. They must think I'm a bit odd. So now I've just neatened the end of the ribbon. I'm just folding it back on itself, and then I'm just making sure that as I work this all the way around the edge of the oval, that I'm concentrating on keeping it even, making sure that not so much the pleats are even, but that the amount of ribbon I'm showing across the above the edge of the cardstock is even. So I keep checking from time to time by flicking the oval over to see, you can see there, to see how the pleats are going and to see that I'm keeping in line. And it's easy if you make a mistake just to pull the ribbon off and start again, or start a section again. And you can see I'm just creating a series of little folds as I as I work around the edge of the oval, and it really is a nice effect, very pretty, very feminine and quite vintage or shabby chic. So it's a nice technique to use on any of the cards you might be making. Perhaps you're using other stamped images and you want to feature them. This is quite a nice way to create a lovely frame around them. And this ribbon, because it's quite fine, it's American seam binding, it really does lend itself to just creating those lovely random frills around the edge of the cardstock. And then as you get to the end, just make sure you neaten that final piece of ribbon and just tuck it slightly behind where you started with the ribbon. So it has created a lovely frame for my stamped image, and I just want to raise this image slightly, so I'm going to be using foam tape to do this, mainly because I can't find my little foam squares, and this one's really sticky. It really messes up my scissors, but it was handy, so I'm going to use it. And I've created plenty of support behind this little cameo, and I'm going to attach that to my piece of cardstock. And because I've got all that double-sided tape already, I can use that to attach the little cameo to the card front. So now it's time to work on those final embellishments, and I decided I wanted to add a couple of butterflies. And these wings, although they're not a whole butterfly, the body is missing. They work quite well when you just join them together with your glue, and I'm going to be using them and just sparkling them up a little bit as a finishing touch on this card. So I'm starting obviously by stamping them in the archival ink, and then I'm colouring them in green. I thought the green would stand out a little bit more against the card, and I'm just picking certain elements, making a mistake there, so I'm going to stamp myself another butterfly. Some of the elements I'm leaving plain and others I'm colouring with the green ink. Then I decided I wanted these wings to glisten and sparkle, so I decided to achieve this by using some distress stickles, which I happen to have that actually match the colour of ink I've been using. So I've gone with the Scattered Straw Distress ink, and I'm just adding those to those sections that I left blank, just dotting the distress stickles onto the butterfly. And I thought actually I could do with a little bit more sparkle than that, and just happen to have a glittery stickles on my desk. This one's Stardust, I think, and then I'm just adding, you can see it's quite subtle because you can't really see it on camera, but just very fine lines of glitter following that pattern on the butterfly wings, and then drying it off. I'm being a bit careful here. Distress stickles you can dry with your heat gun, but you shouldn't really dry your normal stickles, because it can melt those little specks of glitter, but it works quite well on the distress ink. But because it's only small amounts, I'm just keeping it nice and wafty away. And then once everything's dry, I'm coming over the whole of the butterfly wing with my glossy accents. And then once you've encapsulated those butterfly wings with the glossy accents, you're going to have to leave them a little while to dry, so sometime later. The passage of time is always given away by the change in light conditions on my video. So now I'm just cutting out all of those glossy accented wings. You can see how lovely they look, and although you can't see it on camera, I've encapsulated all that lovely glitter as well, so it's quite a nice touch, just to bring a little bit more life into all the monotones. It's just adding texture, I think, by adding that little bit of shine and glimmer. Although I haven't changed the colours in any way, I've kept to the same colour palette. So I wanted to create a little bow for the bottom of the card. You can see here this one was just a little bit big, so I'm going to show you how to do that once I undo this one. So it did take me a little while to get that undone, but I'm going to create a series of loops around my fingers. I'm going to go with 3 because I don't want the ribbon to be too in your face, too bulky, and I'm making sure that the starting position and ending position of the ribbon is in the same place, so that I can loop or push the loops together and have that. Let's start again. So I'm wrapping it around, and then the 2 ends of the ribbon I'm holding on to and pushing that into the centre of the loops, and then taking another piece of ribbon and catching those 2 pieces of ribbon, the 2 ends of ribbon, and just making sure that the knot is in the centre before you pull it really tight, and then pull it tight and knot it again. And this piece will form the tails of your ribbon, and then you can pull the other pieces of the loop into a pleasing bow shape, hopefully. And I'm much happier with this size, and that's going to sit here on the card. So I'm just straightening these tails a little bit and then trimming them diagonally. And this is where you can see the double-sided tape has affected, that sticky foam tape I was telling you about has affected the blades of my scissors. So that's a cleaning job for me later. And I'm just repeating that on the second tail of this ribbon bow. And then deciding where I'm going to put my little butterflies. I've got 3 in total, and I thought I might want one in the middle of my ribbon, but I think they're better on the card. So I'm going to be using hot glue to attach these pieces into position. Another thing that I'm doing is just curving the butterfly wings slightly over my fingers, and this causes the glossy accents to crack. Again, you won't really be able to see that on camera, but it's just quite nice because this is supposed to be a vintage card, that those butterflies aren't quite as pristine as they look at first glance, and that they look a bit like cracked porcelain, and that just helps them look a little bit more aged. So attaching all of my elements with little dots of hot glue. You could use pin flare or a silicone glue if you wanted to, that will work just as well, but obviously the hot glue is a little bit more instant. So just sitting that butterfly and encouraging the wings to raise slightly while that glue dries. Keep looking at whether or not to put one in the bow. Actually, it would have looked quite nice. I always do this when I look back at this on camera. I wasn't too sure when I was looking at it in real life, but actually it would have looked okay in the middle of the ribbon, but in the end, as you can see, I will go with that on the card after all. So as I add those final 2 butterflies, I hope you agree that these little shiny embellishments just pick up that card design and add an extra dimension, a little bit like porcelain butterflies sitting on an old book page. And I've really enjoyed trying this vintage design, and it worked really well with these lovely Da Vinci stamps. So I hope I've given you a few little ideas and tips and techniques that you might be able to use in your card making. I also hope that you pop along to rubberdance.com and check out this lovely new set of stamps, as well as some others that are over there. I really enjoy using them, and I definitely can vouch that you get lovely impressions from Bibby's wonderful stamps. So I really hope that you like my video. If you do, please hit that subscribe button or the like button or the share button. And as usual, I'll leave the links for you at the end of this video so that you can either pop along and get that cutting guide and visit me on my blog, or you could hop from there over to look at the rubber dance stamps. And I'm also going to give you the links to more rubber dance inspiration, and I think I'm also going to give you a little shout out. I've been nominated for a few categories in the Crafty Academy Awards. I'm quite excited about it. The voting closes on the 31st of October, so I'd love it if you would vote for me, and I will leave you the instructions at the end of this video on how to do that should you wish to. So until next time, I really hope that you're having fun crafting and that I've brought something to you that you find interesting. Until next time, thank you for watching. So on with the links and the shout out for votes. First of all, you can click here to go over to my blog to pick up the cutting guide, and then to hop on over to Rubber Dance if you want to check out any of these gorgeous stamps. And then on to the awards. So I'd not really heard of the Crafty Academy Awards till this year. They were running last year apparently, so they're quite new, but they're quite a nice way to recognise all the lovely work that goes on here on YouTube. And if you like my videos and you would like to vote for me, and I sincerely hope that you do, I've been nominated in 4 categories, and you can vote for me in one or all of them, or 2 of them, or 3 of them, whichever you would like. I've been nominated for Best Steampunk, Best Mixed Media, Best Cards and Best Tutorials, and I really hope that you like my work enough to pop along and spend a second to email Betty to let her know that you want to vote for me. And here's the details for that. I've left a link at the bottom of all of these so that you could, if you want to, check out more details on my blog of what the Crafty Academy Awards are all about. But if you like my stuff and just want to get straight on and vote, then please email Betty at crimsonandcream6@aol.com, and if you tell her obviously my name, Helen Allen, and which categories you want to vote for, that would be great. So thank you very much for that. And last but not least, the final link to the Rubber Dance playlist, where you can see lots more creativity using these gorgeous stamps. And I look forward to creating with you again soon.